Kevin Durant is a Phoenix Sun, and on today's episode of Locked On Suns, I'll give you 3 reasons why you should be thrilled, as if you didn't have enough already. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get podcasts. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Monday. Welcome to the first full week of Kevin Durant as a Phoenix Sun. I don't know if it's settled in for you. I don't think it has for me, but we're together on this journey either way. So hit follow, hit subscribe wherever you're finding the show. We're on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. We're free everywhere. The best way to keep us free to support the show is just to go ahead and listen, follow, subscribe, tell a friend even. You can also follow us at Locked On PHX Suns wherever, on Twitter and Instagram, but I don't post there. Twitter. To keep up, I'll throw some questions at you. I'll get audience feedback. We'll have some fun on Twitter. I have a little feeling this is going to be a crazy sprint to the finish. We have some news to get to, and then we're going to get to the 3 reasons why you should be hyped about Kevin Durant in Phoenix. And some of them are on the court, some of them are off the court, some of them are a little bit silly. We'll break it all down. Tomorrow's show, we'll have Brandon Duenas joining us as he does every week to get really nitty-gritty about the on-court fit. I'll have a little bit on that today. But let's start with the news. Terrence Ross is going to be a Phoenix Sun. So buyout candidate, buyout signing, number 1. It's not official yet, but being reported, Terrence Ross will join the Suns. So let's dive into that. Today's show, guys, brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. So it seemed like a given. You hear these buyout things come together very fast because by the time players are negotiating a buyout with their team, they already probably know where they're going to end up. And with Terrence Ross, who you'll know from, he scored 50-plus with the Raptors once upon a time, eventually got a big contract with Orlando that was a little bit questionable the same year they signed Vucevic. Well, they end up trading Vuce. Ross has been sticking it out there on a toiling bad team for a while. This is the last year of that contract that he signed, and now he's eligible, and it seemed like a lock that he was going to end up in Dallas. These things come out quickly, like I said. Then something I think we should get used to, which is going to speak to the point I'm about to make in a moment about reason number 1 to get hype. Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN tweets out a announcement that Ross is in fact going to be joining the Suns after, I believe he said, Monty Williams and Matt Ishbia got involved. Now, the part about this, which will separate conversation, just hear me out. You've already heard, if you read Adrian Wojnarowski's piece about how the KD trade came to be, and now this, very clear that somebody is in Woj's ear from Ishbia's team, right? I don't know who that is necessarily yet. There are a few new people in the mix over in Phoenix that are Ishbia people that maybe the Suns didn't have in the mix before, and so don't be surprised if you continue to hear Matt Ishbia's name being sort of pumped up. We'll come back to that. Terrence Ross as a player, though. The first thing is, you probably know what Terrence Ross is. If you don't really remember him recently, that's okay. Like I said, he hasn't been on a relevant team in a while, but he's a great shooter. He has decent size. So he's 6'6". Maybe great shooter is a little bit of an exaggeration, but I mean, he was shooting 38% from 3 this season with Orlando, played 42 games, started 9, and made 38% of his threes. Last year was a down season. The year before that, not great either, but this was something of a bounce back. He's only 31, so this is not like a washed up, nothing player at the very end of his career. At his peak, like 2018-19, I think before his contract year before this big deal that he's now on the end of, 38% on 7 threes per game. He's averaged as much as 15 points per game in the league. He's started, he's come off the bench, all sorts of different roles. Pretty versatile player, and again, being 6'6", it's like he's just going to be a scorer and a veteran presence defensively with size. Like, I think that's all he is. I personally see Ross more as a really as a regular season addition. You know, it feels a little bit interesting that they went this direction. To me, I would have expected them to try to get Reggie Jackson, although now he's going to the Nuggets, so there's some potential that he wasn't going to be available. Either way, I think Ross will be nice depth, especially with Landry Shamet continuing to be out with this injury. He's not the most trustworthy player that, has ever suited up in the NBA. We don't know necessarily what TJ Warren will bring. It makes sense, especially considering he's a trustworthy veteran who's not going to be ruffling any feathers to bring him in. Now, the last part of this is the Suns now only have one additional roster spot, because if you remember, they were able to open an extra roster spot in the KD trade, right? It was a 3-for-2 trade, and they already had an extra spot open previously. So they now have an extra one. This fills up. Ross will be one. There's still another. The options there could be, is there another buyout player, maybe a guard, while Cam Payne and Landry Shamet both are dealing with foot injuries that have kept them out for quite a long time, especially Payne at this point. Or do they go with Ish Wainwright and escalate his contract to, or even Saben Lee, I suppose, but I would guess more likely would be Wainwright to a real contract like they did last season, where he would become eligible for the playoffs, because two-way players are not. We'll dig into, I'm interested to hear what Brandon thinks about this. We'll talk about that with him tomorrow when we really get deep on roles and system and scheme and all that stuff, because I think there's a lot of directions they could go depending on how they're going to play. That could be a case for one player or another for that final roster spot, but that's where we're left. On the point of Ross, on the point of the Ishbia side of this and Ishbia's role in the Durant thing, and even you look at the Suns taking Ross from Dallas, the number one reason to get to that now that Suns fans should be hyped about KD, that I'm hyped about KD, is, and maybe I'm in the minority, although the numbers, the TV ratings, the engagement, whatever stuff you want to point to kind of tell me that I'm right. I love an NBA villain. And I particularly love an NBA villain when they're in my city with the team that I cover. And I'm really, really excited for this. And it's just going to end up with the Suns having to, whether they want to or not, lean into the identity that was building around them dating back to their falling out against the Mavs last year. People were able to point to the Suns in that 2021 finals run as a fraud, right? We all heard that. Maybe you have friends or family that aren't Suns fans. If you're an NBA family that was like, come on, the Suns, get out of here. They just got lucky with injuries. I don't think that's fully true. I think that's a little unfair, but nevertheless, it was a case to be made. No Jamal Murray in the second round, no AD in the first round, and then the conference finals, no Kawhi. Then they finally run up against the Bucks, and that was that, right? So that happens, then 64 wins, and the Suns being front runners, and they're laughing at Luka, the Luka special, they're being cocky, they're doing this, they're doing that. Then they lose, right? And they hear about it all summer. You hear guys like McHale, Cam Payne, Cam Johnson, all talking about the pain that inflicted on them, and they're, nobody's beating around the bush. Then it's just drama up and down the summer. DeAndre Ayton doesn't want to come back. Jay Crowder gets sent home. No KD trade. What are the lingering effects of that going to be? Media day, which Mark Spears comes on and calls like a ghost town or a funeral or whatever he said. And then they start out well, but the middle of the season, the fraud stuff comes back, right? We're talking about, should they tank? We're talking about, is this era over? Is Chris Paul cooked? Is McHale and DeAndre not cut out for the role we expected or hoped they might live up to? On and on and on and on. This is going to add to that. they have a rivalry with Dallas, right? Like they have this beef with Dallas. I don't know if you fully call it a rivalry, but it's obviously there. There's been drama between the Suns and the Warriors. If you think back to the first week of the season with Golden State and Klay holding up 4 fingers and then getting ejected, and then Booker, I have nothing but respect for him. And those teams have had close battles that have brought out emotions almost every time they've played. The Nuggets thing is going to be front and center, and we know there's a history there. If you remember Jokic getting, I don't remember if he fouled out or got 2 technicals and ejected in the game 4 of that sweep. There's the Clippers angle that's never going to go away with Chris Paul in the conference finals appearance back then. All these things, coupled with the fact that Kevin Durant is now on this team. Bus driver, super team, you destroyed the Nets, whatever's going to get lobbed at him is now going to be part and parcel with the Suns' identity. And I love it. I mean, even if it wasn't the Suns, I would love it. These types of stories, these types of teams bring out the best stuff in the NBA. It's superstar players going up against superstar players. It is storylines. It is giving people a reason to care. I'll return to that from a Suns standpoint in a moment, but I think nothing will top the fact that the Suns' the teams that have pushed them the most in the playoffs the past 2 seasons before this one were the Clippers, whose connections I just went over and are obvious. The Mavs, who just added Kyrie Irving, adding another element of drama and chaos between those 2 teams. And then the Warriors, not in the playoffs, but in the regular season, have brought out the best in the Suns and pushed them the most. And that's Kevin Durant's old team. So the West playoffs were already going to be a bloodbath. We're already going to be insane, very deep, very matchup dependent. Now you have this Durant deal, the Kyrie trade to Dallas, just blowing the top off of all of that. I can't wait. Get your popcorn. It's going to be a blast. Equally excited for the on-court, though. And I don't want to dwell too much on the narrative legacy stuff because I know some fans don't love that, although I think we all deep down have to admit we do. Let's dive into the interchangeability that Kevin Durant will provide to this roster and why it's just going to be a blast to watch and so seamless to fit in. We'll get into that next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs is getting people ready, getting businesses ready, especially small businesses, for the year ahead. If you run a small business, if you work for a small business, or even if you just are in a position to hire, you know how important it can be to surround yourself with the best team members, and that's why you have to use LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with their unique targeting tools. They go beyond resume data by using insights from your job posts, your company, as well as their nearly 1 billion member profiles to put your posts in front of the most qualified candidates. Identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect with them fast and for free. LinkedIn Jobs also makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications, all on one platform. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to take advantage. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Talked about the villainy, talked about the rivalries and the storylines that are going to be everywhere across the NBA Western Conference playoffs. As reason number one to get hyped about Kevin Durant in Phoenix. Here's reason number 2. Interchangeability. I don't know if that's a word, but it's a word for our show today. It's a word that describes exactly why Kevin Durant is going to be such a hand-in-glove fit here in Phoenix. Okay? I recommend Nikias Duncan, who's been on this show before. You probably know him if you're an NBA nerd like I am. He writes at basketballnews.com. He wrote a very good breakdown of a lot of these big picture, but also smaller reasons why Durant is going to be such a perfect match for what the Suns already do. And that's that's really it, right? It's not even just so much that, oh wow, the Suns have all these complementary pieces that are going to fit around Durant. Some of that's true, right? I think having Chris Paul as a table setter is going to be a really cool element of this that Durant's never really played with, right? Like Russell Westbrook did that a little bit because you got to. If you're playing with Durant, you gotta find him coming off of screens. You've got to, work him into his spots, but that wasn't really Russ's game, obviously. Then you have Steph Curry, who's a very different type of player. Draymond Green and Andre Iguodala were basically their point guards. And then Kyrie Irving, who's in some cases not much of a point guard really at all. I guess James Harden at times is probably the closest to this type of Chris Paul feeder that you can get. So there is some of that, right? There's shooting, there's defense, there's a rim protector, big man like Ayton that will set Durant up for success. But when I say interchangeability, I more mean it in the flip direction. And that's what Nakai has kind of illustrated, and a lot of people have been hyped about, and what I thought of immediately when Kevin Durant got traded here. The ways that Durant will fit with what the Suns already do, right? And I'll give you a few examples. So let's talk about matchups for a second first, right? The place my head went immediately when this trade happened in terms of, we all know, like, oh, they're going to be unguardable, right? Like, that's the Bleacher Report Instagram post with, like, the exploding head emoji that we all probably saw some version of a million times since the deal happened. Yeah, okay, yes, they're going to be unguardable. Great. A lot of teams, what does that really mean? What is the practical application of how that will manifest on the court, right? So I think the number one thing that I think of is, how have switchable teams guarded Chris Paul, especially, and in some cases Devin Booker in the past, right? They've put a bigger player on them so that when the screen comes, when Booker and Paul, who tend to prefer to have a screen to get themselves, to create an advantage for themselves, which is what offense is all about, right? Creating an advantage. Those two guys want a screen. Well, what happens when you put a bigger player on them is they don't have anything to create. There's no advantage being created, right? Like, think about this in a more specific sense. Draymond Green, right? He guards Chris Paul when the Suns play the Warriors. Basically, ever since the Suns got Chris Paul, that's what the Warriors have done. Although that first season, the Warriors were not really much of a factor. Draymond then can switch on to DeAndre Ayton when they set a screen, right? Or anybody when they set a screen. The Suns have used Mikal Bridges as a screener in the past. Okay, well, that doesn't work when it's Draymond, right? You think about the Mavs series last year. That was Dorian Finney-Smith. That was Reggie Bullock. And there's not really much to happen because, on the flip side, maybe who's guarding DeAndre Ayton? Could be Kevon Looney. Could be Andrew Wiggins. We don't necessarily know. Well, those guys can also guard Chris Paul in a pinch at the end of the clock, especially, right? Or with the Mavs, Maxi Kleber, more than capable of doing that, right? So what do you do when that's Kevin Durant, right? What do you do when that is Kevin Durant setting the screen, or Kevin Durant is the other player, right? Because whether we necessarily wanted it to be true or not, if you're picking your poison, Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, Torrey Craig, Jay Crowder, those were guys you were going to hide weaker defenders on, right? Steph Curry's going to guard one of those guys, maybe. Even Klay Thompson, who's been, not himself defensively. Jordan Poole, just to keep the Warriors example. But in the Mavs series, it was Luka, it was Brunson, are able to go guard somebody that's basically just spotting up in the corner, right? You're going to do that when it's Kevin Durant? Right? No, you're not. And so I think that is what I mean by interchangeability. You just start to put the chess pieces that teams had previously moved for the Suns, and that's what it will really mean for this team to be really, really hard to guard. Keeping on the offense, and I will get to the defense in a second, and we'll break down a lot more of this in more detail with Brandon tomorrow. Offensively, you think back when the Suns made their first run. I don't know if you all remember, but Zach Lowe was really the first one to do a whole article about this, where the intricacy and the complexity of the Suns pick and roll attack, and some of the things that they did really, really well that created open shots for guys who weren't much of a threat, like I just said, who were basically being hidden, were, a surprise back screen for the player who was supposed to be guarding the corner, right? So maybe Cam Johnson is in one corner, Mikal Bridges is in the other corner. Cam cuts. Mikal Bridges maybe doesn't actually relocate like you would normally think, but all of a sudden Cam is actually not even really a threat to score. He's setting a screen and Bridges is now wide open because his defender can't close out. Or the Suns would have some of that cutting happening and then they would rise. That was one of the great things Jay Crowder was really good at offensively, is that relocate and sort of like rising up where you were spacing out in the corner. Now all of a sudden you're on the wing. You're in that right where the arc starts to curve type of area and the defense can lose track of you, or that closeout is just a little bit longer, all these different things. Or lastly, they were doing extra motion like that, incorporating that off-ball screening and moving while the real pick and roll at the top of the key is happening, which means that when DeAndre Ayton is rolling to the basket for a lob, the player who would normally help, and this was only made easier because a guy like Michael Porter Jr. or even Aaron Gordon, who are pretty undersized, not amazing athletes, were the ones in that position against Denver when they just disintegrated the Denver defense, which will be something we talk about, right? Talking about who's the favorite in the West. The Suns have already proven they can beat Denver's defense. Those guys being the low man who's supposed to help and try to contest a lob to DeAndre Ayton or a drop pass to DeAndre Ayton, a la Amare Stoudemire, getting the ball on the roll and a one dribble dunk, like all these different things that Ayton does in that situation. Well, if you're distracting and demanding attention out of that low, basically power forward defender who's supposed to be helping over, that help is already far with good shooters in the corner. When you're making that defender need to communicate with another guy or figure out where he's supposed to be just to guard the shooter, and then all of a sudden he's also trying to figure out how he can help at the rim against a 7-footer with great athleticism and touch like Ayton, it just becomes really hard. It already was, right? This teams figured it out. They made it so that the ball could never even get out of Booker and Paul's hands like we saw with some of those traps and everything, but at their best, that's what makes the Suns so hard to guard. We're talking about doing that with Jay Crowder, a worse version of Mikal Bridges 2 years ago. The Suns are going to be doing that now with the best shooter maybe overall in terms of the different places on the floor that he can get in the history of the NBA. The best go get a bucket, make a basket player, maybe that the game has ever seen. I guess you could probably say Michael Jordan, although the game hadn't evolved in a way back then with him or Kobe Bryant that threes were such that the players were making the defense respect them 30 feet out like Durant can. So it's going to be crazy, right? I want to really quickly close on the defense. I know I'm going long here. You can hear me geeking out already. The defense, I think the one thing, and we will dive into this more tomorrow, is the fact that for years we've talked about DeAndre Ayton needing that big four-man, right? It's why Pascal Siakam was such an interesting target. If you think back all the way to like Ayton's rookie year and maybe even his second season before Gordon was traded to Denver and before Jay Crowder got here, even he was a candidate, right? Like it always came back to that because of his, I don't even want to say limitations, but it's like there's only so many like Rudy Gobert's or, whatever. Even the best defenses tend to have options like that. Brook Lopez is a great defender. He's more of an Ayton type defender. Well, he has Giannis Antetokounmpo. So even the Bucks knew, they got to have a little bit of both. They got to be able to do both. The Suns have never had that. They were starting a 6'6" guy in Crowder at the 4 during their best seasons with Ayton. Now he's going to have a 7-footer, right? So you think about the ways that the Suns have been hesitant to really lean into switching Ayton on the perimeter, really blitz with Ayton when it comes to like how they were guarding Luka, and we were all just, pulling our hair out, wondering why they were allowing Luka to get those switches, allowing him to get downhill, allowing him to get into the post. Well, some of that is if you push Ayton all the way out to being 25 plus feet away from the hoop and the ball moves, Well, there's no one to protect the rim, and you're giving up free baskets at the rim, layups, dunks, whatever. Having Kevin Durant there will allow them to get a little bit more creative, a little bit more flexible, and I think that's part of why I'm not as worried as I could be, although we'll have to see it play out, about not having a Mikal Bridges type of on-ball point of attack defender still on this roster. Yes, we can see what Josh Okogie might do. Yes, there may be some other options, but I'm less worried about that if the Suns are able to have a different type of scheme where it's not just going to be Bridges goes over and contests from behind and then Ayton is dropped into the paint and they try to force mid-rangers that way. They send help from the corners aggressively. We know what the Suns defense has been. It's going to not be the same anymore, and that's part of why thinking about how they have been, when you think about the interchangeability that I'm talking about here, I guess this is actually an evolution of their scheme. It might not be quite the same interchangeability because Durant won't be in that Crowder role. He will be elevating what they are. And I'm really, defense might be the thing I'm most excited about. But again, we will dive in fully to the X's and O's for a whole show tomorrow. The last thing I want to close with is building this fan base, the Kevin Durant effect of what it really means to get the attention of sports fans here. It maybe is on my mind a little more because of the Super Bowl, but I want to discuss what that will look like and why maybe Matt Ishbia was a little more aggressive than we maybe expected after one more quick break. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook app, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers to threes drained. All right, so my favorite NBA bets for the week. Let's see here. So we have parlays to score 20-plus points. I'm looking at Sunday's games because that's what's up right now. We can build out Pascal Siakam, although that's minus 600. Let's go with Fred VanVleet minus 210. You can then add first basket, which is interesting. That feels actually dangerous. Let me go to 6+ assists, and we'll put VanVleet there as well. So I'm expecting against Detroit, VanVleet to have 20-plus points and 6+ assists. That doesn't feel too crazy. And then 8+ rebounds. I'm going to go with Jakob Poeltl in his debut. You put all those together, you boost your odds. You're not looking at minus odds on all those guys anymore. Suddenly, you're adding them all together, and that's how you maximize that check. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay, just like I just said. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Building out this fan base is the last, and probably to a lot of people in the Suns organization, probably most important part of all of this. Winning is forever. Winning puts a banner there. Winning cements everything that you build when you put a roster like this together. But this part is already here, I guess, right? Like, they got him. They got their guy. And in the short term, I think you probably already seen it. Like, maybe you don't even need me to tell you. This fan base, this community, whether it's even people who already were fans, is going to be energized, right? I mean, it's going to be, I think there was a lull. I think it's fair to say, I can tell you from the podcast numbers, I can tell you from people in my everyday life who care about this stuff, that since they lost to Dallas last year, I think people's expectations fell. I think they were worried about, is this era over? Is Chris Paul done? Is it really just going to be the end of this? And when you go and get Kevin Durant, this is about more than just the Suns, right? Like, there are people who are just Kevin Durant fans. There are people who have gravitated toward him throughout his career. Maybe they were originally Warriors fans. Maybe they were originally Thunder fans. Maybe they're just people who have respected his game and just like him, and those people will be brought in. And what you add up when you combine the fact that you're re-energizing the local fans, you're bringing in new people, you create an opportunity to create lifelong fans. And like, I know it might sound like I'm doing like a Suns marketing ad right now. I'm not. I really am just saying this matters to me. If you listened back when they made the finals, this is something I talked about a lot because I was unfortunate to basically the majority of my, like, the time I've really, really cared about basketball has been when the Suns were god-awful. You know, and that's part of why I'm not like the biggest fan and some of you criticize me, right? It's like they were very good when I was a young kid. Then they were not good at all for a long time. And I think they really suffered for that. I don't know a lot of people like my age, you know, in maybe let's say from age 20 to 30, like that window, the like, you know, older Gen Z people who care about the Suns. And I think as a result of that, not a lot of them care about basketball. Not a lot of them care about the NBA. I know for a fact that finals run really started to change people's minds. And I know that this Durant trade, you probably know, if you're a big Suns fan, if you have tickets, season tickets, or you're at a lot of games, or you're always sitting down to watch the games at night, and that's why you listen to this show, I'm sure you've heard about this trade from way more people than you had talked Suns with in a very long time. And like, I don't care about it from the organization making money standpoint, but I care about it because this is one of the original NBA franchises. This is a team that really helped create a sports culture and a culture in general in this city. And it's an organization that Robert Sarver ran into the ground. And I just care about, this is the only place I've ever lived. This is the only, you know, NBA team that I've ever really cared about in a deep way as like a connection to it. Obviously, there's teams I've liked and rooted for, but, you know, the Suns are the team that I care about. And so I just think Durant elevates it to a whole other level. We'll see if he embraces that. He has been a little bit of a wandering soul in his NBA career, and there's a whole bunch of baggage around that. But having Book here, who's been here forever, having Chris Paul, who has really committed and absorbed what that means, and I think Durant will too. And whether anyone really does or doesn't, the bottom line is you're great. They're going to win a lot. They're going to be making a deep playoff run, we all assume, again. And people just will watch. People will care. People will get invested. And that's the coolest thing. That's what this is all about, right? It's if you put a banner up in an arena no one goes to, who cares, right? Like, there's a lot of franchises you can point to that once upon a time had a lot of success, and now, you know, do they have fans? Like the Pistons. You know, I think the Pistons are a good example. When they closed the Palace at Auburn Hills, now they moved to this shiny new downtown facility, and they've struggled to keep fans. They've struggled to be a relevant franchise despite the Bad Boys and the Billups teams and whatever. And I guess I'm thinking of them because Matt Ishbia comes from that. You know, Devin Booker grew up around that, and that is the problem. That's what can happen when it goes on 20 years of irrelevance. The Suns were going on 10, and it got pretty bleak. This is going to help them get out of it. And Durant is just a name that everybody who cares even just a little bit about sports knows, and there's no avoiding, there's no getting around that impact. So I'm really looking forward to the energy. I hope people are still able to get into this arena, go to games, fall in love with this team, really, really get excited. And we'll be here every step of the way together. So tell your friends, hit subscribe, hit follow, wherever you're listening, including YouTube. Make sure to come along for this ride every Monday through Friday here on Locked On Suns. We'll probably do some bonus episodes. This team's going to be a blast, guys. So keep it right here. That'll do it for today's show. Thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen to start your week. Now go make Locked On NBA your second listen to get caught up on all the fallout from trade deadline week and where the NBA goes during the stretch run. I'll be on that show as well, so you can check that out wherever you listen to podcasts too. And I will listen. I will talk to you all tomorrow.